twitch in my hands. "This design is quaint," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "But our clients expect innovation, not whatever this is." The board members shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Finley, our CFO, cleared his throat as if to speak, but Madeline's raised eyebrows silenced him. She'd been at the company less than 8 months, yet somehow wielded this power. "Rhiannon," Adeline chimed in, her voice falsely sweet as she adjusted her glasses. "We've noticed a pattern in your work lately, a lack of vision." I stared at the presentation I'd spent 3 sleepless nights perfecting. The quarterly numbers were undeniable. My designs had increased sales by 32%, but looking at the faces around me, I realized numbers didn't matter anymore. "Perhaps," said Madeline, sliding forward a folder I hadn't noticed before, "it's time to consider whether your talents might be better utilized elsewhere." Inside was a separation agreement, predated from 2 weeks ago. They'd planned this ambush long before today's meeting. Before I'd even finished the presentation, they were now tearing apart. "Verity wanted us to give you this opportunity to resign gracefully," said Griffin, the third member of their triumvirate, his fingers steepled as if in prayer. "Given your history with her." My throat closed at the mention of Verity's name, my mentor, my champion. Now, undergoing her 3rd round of treatments, too weak to attend board meetings, too distant to see what was happening in the company she'd built from nothing. "I'd like to speak with Verity directly," I managed, my voice embarrassingly thin. Madeline's smile tightened. She specifically asked not to be bothered with this, said it was too disappointing. That single word, disappointing, pierced deeper than anything else they could have said. The thought of disappointing Verity was unbearable. "We need your decision today," Griffin added, sliding a pen toward me. "For the sake of the company." I looked around the table, faces I'd worked alongside for years now, carefully avoiding my gaze. The security guard hovering by the door, apparently there to escort me out regardless of my decision. The humiliation burned through me like acid through metal. 5 years of my life, countless nights, designs that had transformed this small studio into a recognized name, all being erased in a 15-minute meeting. I signed the paper. "Your personal items have been packed," Adeline said, her voice bright as if this were a celebration. "No need to return to your workspace." As I stood to leave, Madeline placed a hand on my shoulder. "Creative fields can be so volatile. Perhaps something more stable would suit you better." I walked out with a cardboard box of belongings, their murmurs following me until the heavy glass doors closed behind me. On the sidewalk, I looked up at the elegant sign I'd helped design, Veracity Jewelry Design. 2 years later, I would walk through those same doors again, but everything would be different. Because what Madeline, Adeline, and Griffin didn't know as they orchestrated my humiliating exit was that they had just set in motion the beginning of their own downfall, and I would be the architect of it. Wait, before I continue with what happened after that terrible day, if you're enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more revenge stories that will make your heart race. Drop a comment about what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have signed that paper? I'd love to hear your thoughts. My name is Rhiannon Wesley. I'm 34 years old with a master's degree in fine arts and a specialization in metalwork and gemology. Growing up, I was the quiet girl with calloused hands who'd rather spend lunch periods sketching designs than socializing. My mother was a nurse who worked double shifts. My father left when I was 4. We never had much, but we had enough. Jewelry design wasn't just a career choice for me. It was the language I spoke when words failed. Each piece I created told a story, carried an emotion, preserved a memory. In my hands, metal and stone became more than decorative objects. They became vessels of meaning. I met Verity Blackwood when I was 29, struggling to make rent by selling my designs at local markets while working as a barista. She bought a pair of my earrings, then returned the next weekend for a necklace. On her 3rd visit, she didn't buy anything. Instead, she handed me her business card. "I've been watching how you talk about your work," she said. "You don't sell jewelry. You translate human experiences into wearable art. I need someone like you." Verity was 62 then, a legend in the industry who had built Veracity from her kitchen table 30 years earlier. Despite her success, She still had soil under her fingernails from her garden and wore jewelry that sometimes looked peculiar but always felt right against the skin. My first day at Veracity, she didn't put me in the design department. Instead, she sat me at a workbench beside her and handed me a misshapen lump of silver. "Make something honest," she said. I worked that silver for 8 hours, forming it into a pendant that resembled a seed breaking open. When I finished, my hands were trembling with exhaustion. Verity examined it, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. Then she nodded once. "You understand the difference between decorating a body and honoring it. That's rare." Within 2 years, I became creative director. My designs helped transform Veracity from a respected local studio into a national name, with waiting lists and features in prestigious magazines. Our pieces weren't the most expensive on the market, but they became known for how they moved with the body, how they caught light at unexpected angles, how they felt alive against the skin. Then Verity got sick. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4 by the time they found it. "Keep designing," she told me from her hospital bed. "The company needs your voice." With Verity absent, the board brought in industry veterans to help maintain stability. Madeline Thorne, with her perfectly styled bobbin background at a famous auction house. Adeline Winters, with her academic credentials and connections to wealthy collectors. Griffin Peck, with his sales experience and charismatic presentations. They arrived with portfolios of impressive achievements and immediately began questioning everything about Veracity's approach. "The market is shifting," Madeline explained during her first week. "We need to adjust our positioning." At first, I tried to collaborate. I shared my design process, my insights about our clients, the philosophy Verity had built the company on. They nodded and took notes and smiled in ways that never reached their eyes. Then, strange things began happening. A custom wedding ring I designed for an important client developed a crack before the presentation. My sketchbook disappeared for 3 days, then reappeared with subtle alterations to key designs. Client meetings I was scheduled to lead were suddenly reassigned to Madeline or Griffin, who would return with feedback that contradicted everything the client had originally requested. "They felt your design was too unconventional," Griffin would explain, though when I checked with the clients later, they expressed confusion about why their requests had been changed. Premium sapphires I'd selected for a signature collection were swapped for lower quality stones that lacked the depth of color I'd specified. "Budget considerations," Adeline explained, though our profit margins were higher than ever. During an important presentation to our biggest potential client, slides showcasing my most innovative designs were mysteriously corrupted, showing only blank screens. "Technology," Madeline sighed, before smoothly transitioning to her own prepared materials. They were careful, always. Nothing could be directly traced back to sabotage. Nothing I could take to the board as evidence. Just a steady erosion of my work, my reputation, my confidence. When I tried to visit Verity in the hospital to tell her what was happening, I found Adeline already there. "She's resting," Adeline said, blocking the doorway. "The doctors say stress could worsen her condition. She specifically asked not to be troubled with work matters." I later learned from a nurse that Verity had been asking for me, but my messages were never delivered. The isolation was calculated and complete. Staff members I'd worked alongside for years began avoiding me, whispering when I entered rooms, questioning decisions I'd made 100 times before. "We're just concerned," Madeline would say during meetings, her voice gentle as she outlined another of my supposed failures. "We all want what's best for Verity's company." By the time they orchestrated my final humiliation in that board meeting, I was already a ghost in the company I'd helped build. The separation agreement wasn't just the end of my job. It was the culmination of months of carefully orchestrated psychological warfare. I left Veracity that day, believing I had failed Verity, believing I had never been good enough, believing the spark that had once made my design special had somehow burned out. For 6 months, I couldn't touch metal or sketch a design. I moved to a smaller apartment, took a job teaching basic metalwork at a community center, and tried to rebuild some semblance of a life. But something inside me had broken the day I walked out of Veracity. Then came the call that changed everything. "Ms. Wesley, this is Bartholomew Reed, attorney for Verity Blackwood. I'm afraid I have some difficult news." Verity had passed away. After months of fighting, the cancer had finally won. She asked to see you many times near the end, Bartholomew said, his voice gentle. Her care team said your visits were repeatedly blocked by colleagues claiming to be protecting her rest periods. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. She had wanted to see me. She hadn't been disappointed in me. There's more, Bartholomew continued. Ms. Blackwood made some significant changes to her will in her final weeks. She's requested your presence at the reading tomorrow morning. I arrived at Bartholomew's office, expecting nothing more than perhaps a small memento, a final goodbye from my mentor. What I didn't expect was to find Madeline, Adeline, and Griffin already seated in the conference room, their expressions a mixture of surprise and poorly concealed annoyance at my arrival. What is she doing here? Madeline asked, not bothering to hide her disdain. Bartholomew simply adjusted his glasses and began reading Verity's will. The room fell silent as the words washed over us. Verity had left me everything: the company, the property, the inventory, all assets and intellectual property rights. Veracity Jewelry Design, valued at over $3 million, was now entirely mine. This can't be legal, Griffin sputtered, his face flushing red. She wasn't in her right mind. We'll contest this. Bartholomew slid a video across the table. Ms. Blackwood anticipated your reaction. She recorded this with 2 independent medical professionals certifying her mental competence. The video showed Verity, thin but clear-eyed, speaking directly to the camera. Rhiannon, if you're watching this, I failed to protect you, and for that, I am deeply sorry. What happened at Veracity in my absence was not what I intended. These 3 individuals, she gestured to photographs of Madeline, Adeline, and Griffin, were brought in against my better judgment by board members who believed their industry connections would benefit the company. She took a labored breath before continuing. What they didn't understand is that Veracity was never about connections or trends. It was about honesty in design, about creating pieces that honor the wearer rather than simply decorating them. You understood that from the beginning. That's why I'm leaving everything to you, because you're the only one who truly knows what veracity means. The video ended, and the room remained silent for several long moments. This changes nothing, Adeline finally said, her voice tight. We have contracts, legal agreements that guarantee our positions. I looked to Bartholomew, who nodded encouragingly. Then, I guess I'll see you tomorrow, I said, standing up, at the company I now own. As I walked out, I heard Griffin's angry voice. She doesn't know what she's doing. She'll run it into the ground within a year. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps I didn't know what I was doing. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would rather burn Veracity to the ground than let them continue to desecrate what Verity had built. What I didn't yet know was exactly how I would reclaim not just the company, but the confidence they had so methodically destroyed. I had ownership on paper, but they had spent months embedding themselves into every aspect of the business. They had allies on staff, connections with clients, and a head start on manipulating the company's systems. As I stood outside Bartholomew's office, the weight of what lay ahead almost crushed me. How could I possibly outmaneuver 3 people who had made careers out of strategic deception? But then I remembered something Verity had told me on my first day. Metal remembers. Every time you hammer it, fold it, heat it, it keeps a record. Your job is to make those memories beautiful. Perhaps it was time to see what memories Veracity held about Madeline, Adeline, and Griffin. And perhaps it was time to hammer out something new from the material of my own pain. Tomorrow, I would walk back into Veracity. And this time, I wouldn't be leaving. The next morning, I arrived at Veracity 30 minutes before opening. The security guard did a double take as I approached the glass doors, hesitating before letting me in. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on me. Less than 7 months ago, a different guard had watched me leave with a box of personal items. My dignity in tatters. Ms. Wesley, he said, nodding respectfully as he held the door. Welcome back. The studio was quiet, morning light streaming through the tall windows. I stood in the reception area, allowing memories to wash over me, both good and painful. The display cases showcasing our most iconic pieces. the framed photo of Verity on opening day 30 years ago, the workbenches visible through the glass partition where artisans would soon be arriving. I walked slowly toward what had once been my design studio, noticing immediately how it had changed. My organized chaos had been replaced with sterile minimalism. The inspiration wall where I'd pinned sketches, material samples, and client notes was now bare except for a single framed magazine cover featuring Madeline accepting an industry award. A voice behind me made me jump. "You're early." I turned to find Pierre, our master metalsmith who had worked with Verity for nearly 20 years. His eyes were cautious, but not unkind. "I wanted a moment to reorient myself," I said. He nodded, studying my face. "They told us you had a breakdown, that you couldn't handle the pressure anymore." The statement hung between us, neither accusation nor question. "And what did you think, Pierre?" His weathered hands traced the edge of a nearby workbench. "I thought that in 30 years of metalwork, I've never seen pressure crack something that wasn't flawed to begin with." Before I could respond, the elevator chimed. The morning staff began arriving, some stopping in surprise at the sight of me, others hurrying past with averted eyes. Many were faces I recognized, though there were several I didn't. At precisely 8:30, the triumvirate arrived together, as though choreographed. They faltered only slightly upon seeing me standing in the center of the main floor. Madeline recovered first, her perfect smile sliding into place. "Rhiannon," she said, approaching with open arms, as if we were old friends. "What a lovely surprise. We didn't expect you so soon." "I own a jewelry company now," I replied, stepping back from her attempted embrace. "Seems like I should check in." Griffin laughed, too loudly. Of course. Though there's no need to disrupt your schedule, we have everything under control here." "I'm sure you do," I said. "That's why I've called an all-staff meeting in 30 minutes. Conference room A." Adeline's smile tightened. "We actually have client presentations this morning. Perhaps we could schedule something for later this week? Give you time to adjust." "The meeting stands," I said, turning to walk toward Verity's, now my, office. "Oh, and I've invited Bartholomew Reed to join us. He has some interesting insights about the company's legal structure." I didn't wait for their response. Verity's office was largely untouched, a shrine rather than a functional workspace. Her glasses still sat on the desk. A half-finished cup of tea, long since evaporated, remained on the side table. Her garden shears lay beside a vase of dried flowers. They had preserved it perfectly, telling the staff it was out of respect. But I knew better. This room was their trophy, physical proof of their successful takeover. I sat in Verity's chair and began reviewing the files Bartholomew had sent over the previous night. Financial statements, client contracts, employee records, the legal framework of the company Verity had built and I now owned. When I entered conference room, 30 minutes later, every seat was filled. Staff members glanced nervously between me and the trio, who had positioned themselves at the opposite end of the table. Bartholomew sat quietly to my right, his leather portfolio closed before him. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "For those who don't know me, I'm Rhiannon Wesley. I was creative director here until about 7 months ago. And now she's our new owner," Madeline interjected, her tone suggesting she was helping me along. "A surprising development for us all." I nodded. Surprising indeed, especially given the circumstances of my departure. The room tensed. "But today isn't about the past," I continued. "It's about Veracity's future. Verity built this company on a philosophy that jewelry should honor the wearer, not just decorate them. That philosophy will continue to guide us going forward." Griffin cleared his throat. "While sentiment is valuable, Rhiannon, the market has evolved. Our current direction has increased quarterly profits by 17%. "At what cost?" I asked, opening the folder before me. "Client retention has dropped by 38%. Custom commissions, once our hallmark, are down by over half. Social media engagement has plummeted." "Initial growing pains," Adeline said dismissively. "The new clientele we're attracting spends more per purchase. They buy once and don't return," I countered. "That's not sustainable growth." Madeline's smile never wavered. "Perhaps this is a conversation best had in private. Staff meetings are typically for operational updates, not strategy discussions. I disagree, I said. Everyone in this room contributes to what makes Veracity special. They deserve to understand the company's direction. I turned to address the wider group. Starting today, we're returning to our core values: quality over quantity, artistry over mass production, connection over transaction. The trio exchanged glances. Griffin leaned forward, his expression sympathetic but firm. Rhiannon, before you make sweeping changes, there's something you should know. He slid 3 folders across the table. These are our employment contracts, signed by the board during Verity's illness. We each hold the title of senior partner with protected decision-making authority. I opened the first folder, skimming the document inside. The terms were exactly as Griffin had indicated. Each of them had been granted substantial authority and protection from termination. Interesting, I said, passing the folders to Bartholomew. We're not trying to undermine you, Adeline added, her voice gentle. We simply want to ensure a smooth transition. These agreements protect the company's stability. Bartholomew adjusted his glasses as he reviewed the documents. The room was silent, tension building with each passing second. These appear to be in order, he finally said. Madeline's smile widened. Wonderful. Now that's settled, perhaps we can… However, Bartholomew continued, as legal counsel for Verity Blackwood, and now for Ms. Wesley, I should point out that these agreements, while binding, are subject to the company's articles of incorporation. He opened his portfolio and removed a document. Section 7, paragraph 3, states that, while senior partners may not be terminated without cause, the owner retains the right to reassign responsibilities and restructure departments as needed for the company's benefit. The trio's confident expressions faltered. What exactly does that mean? Griffin demanded. I leaned forward. It means you can keep your titles and your salaries, but as of today, your responsibilities are changing. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in controlled chaos. I reassigned Madeline from client relations to inventory management, Adeline from marketing to quality control, Griffin from sales to production support. This is absurd, Madeline hissed as the meeting concluded. You can't possibly expect us to accept these positions. Your contracts guarantee your titles and compensation, not your specific roles, I replied. You're welcome to resign, of course. You think you're being clever, Griffin said, his voice low, but you have no idea what you're up against. Actually, I do, I said. I've spent 7 months thinking about nothing else. As the staff filed out, many lingered, wanting to speak but hesitant. Finally, Pierre approached. The Augusta Commission, he said quietly. They've been asking for you specifically. Refuse to work with anyone else. I felt a small flame of hope ignite. They're still interested? He nodded. There are others too. Clients who left when you did. Word travels fast in this industry. Over the next weeks, the battle lines were clearly drawn. The trio refused to resign, determined to wait me out. They performed their new duties with bare minimum effort while meeting secretly with board members, suppliers, and key clients. I worked 18-hour days, reconnecting with former clients, rebuilding relationships with artisans, and most importantly, designing again. My fingers remembered what my mind had tried to forget, the way metal yields to persistent pressure, the way stones reveal their true character under proper light. 1 month after my return, I unveiled a new collection, 7 pieces inspired by resilience and renewal. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Orders flooded in, press coverage exploded, former clients returned, bringing new ones with them. Through it all, Madeline, Adeline, and Griffin watched and waited, their smiles growing more strained with each success. I knew they were plotting something. Their whispered conversations stopped when I approached. Their sudden business trips coincided with meetings of our most important suppliers. They're trying to turn the board against you, Bartholomew warned during one of our weekly meetings, suggesting your changes are too radical, too risky. Let them try, I said, showing him the latest sales figures. The breaking point came 3 months after my return. I arrived early, as had become my habit, to find my office door ajar. Inside, Griffin was at my computer, downloading files to an external drive. Gathering research? I asked from the doorway. He startled but quickly recovered. Just collecting some historical data the board requested. Nothing confidential. Of course, I said, making no move to stop him. Though next time, you might want to ask first. He left with the drive, and I made no attempt to prevent it. Instead, I called Bartholomew. It's happening, I said, just as we anticipated. The next day, Madeline requested a private meeting. This isn't working, she said, her perfect composure showing tiny fractures. We both know it. On that we agree, I replied. We're prepared to negotiate our departure, she continued. For appropriate compensation, of course. I raised an eyebrow. You want me to pay you to leave? We want fair recognition of our contributions, she corrected. A reasonable settlement to avoid any unpleasantness. What kind of unpleasantness did you have in mind? Her smile turned cold. The board meets next week. We have evidence that you've been misrepresenting the company's financial position, that your personal vendetta against us is endangering Veracity's future. Evidence? Financial projections, client communications, design archives. She shrugged elegantly. It's amazing what people leave unprotected on company servers. I nodded slowly. I see. And your proposal? 2 years' salary each, plus a percentage of future revenues from collections developed during our tenure. In exchange, we leave quietly, with positive public statements all around. That's very generous of you, I said. I'll need time to consider. Not too much time, she warned. The board meeting is Tuesday. After she left, I sat in silence, staring at the small garden visible from my office window. Verity had planted it herself, choosing each flower for its resilience rather than its beauty. Blossoms that could withstand frost and drought, that returned year after year despite adversity. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. I barely slept, working through the night to ensure everything was ready. By Monday evening, dark circles shadowed my eyes, but a strange calm had settled over me. Tuesday morning arrived bright and clear. I dressed carefully in a suit I'd designed myself, severe in cut but with unexpected details visible only up close. Around my neck, I wore the pendant I'd made on my first day at Veracity, the silver seed breaking open. The board members arrived one by one, nodding politely but avoiding direct eye contact. The trio entered last, Madeline carrying a portfolio that presumably contained their evidence. They seated themselves opposite me, their confidence palpable. Thank you all for coming, I began. Before we address the agenda, I'd like to make an announcement. The room quieted. Yesterday, I finalized an agreement with the International Guild of Fine Jewelry Designers. They've selected Veracity to showcase our archives and current collections at their annual exhibition next month. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the room. The exhibition was by invitation only, a prestigious honor typically reserved for established houses with decades of history. Additionally, I continued, 3 of our newest pieces have been nominated for innovation awards. One board member leaned forward. That's extraordinary. Congratulations. Madeline's smile tightened. While accolades are wonderful, we have more pressing matters to discuss today. She opened her portfolio. Specifically, concerns about the company's current leadership and direction. For the next 20 minutes, she presented their case, charts showing projected losses based on my new direction, emails taken out of context to suggest I was alienating key partners. Design sketches they claimed showed a creative decline. When she finished, the room was silent. Board members glanced at each other, unsure how to proceed. Thank you, Madeline, I said. That was very thorough. I turned to the board. Now, if you'll permit me, I'd like to offer a different perspective. I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's display system. On the screen appeared a simple graph, client retention rates over the past 2 years. When I left Veracity 7 months ago, client retention had dropped to an all-time low. I explained. Longtime customers were leaving, despite the trio's claims of increased profits. I clicked to the next slide. Detailed financial projections showing sustainable growth based on returning clients and new commissions. Short-term profit spikes are easy to achieve by cutting quality and raising prices. Sustainable growth requires client loyalty and word-of-mouth recommendations. For the next hour, I methodically dismantled their case, presenting evidence of how their leadership had damaged Veracity's reputation, alienated core clients, and compromised the quality that had been our hallmark. The board members' expressions shifted from skepticism to concern to outright alarm. But this isn't just about numbers, I said, reaching the end of my presentation. It's about integrity. About honoring Verity's vision. I paused, looking directly at the trio, and about honesty in how we conduct ourselves. I clicked to one final slide. These are files that were downloaded from my computer 3 days ago. Design archives, client lists, supplier contracts, everything needed to start a competing jewelry design company. Griffin's face flushed. That's absurd. Where's your proof? The files were watermarked, I said quietly, each with a unique digital signature that activates when copied. Standard practice for protecting intellectual property. Adeline laughed nervously. This is ridiculous. A desperate attempt to… Matt… To what? I interrupted. To protect the company Verity built? To prevent you from stealing what isn't yours? Again? The room fell silent. I don't want your resignations, I said, looking at each of them in turn. I don't want settlements or legal battles or public scandals. What do you want? Madeline asked, her voice barely audible. I smiled. I want you to stay. Confusion rippled through the room. The board members exchanged bewildered glances while the trio stared at me with naked suspicion. You want us to stay? Griffin repeated, his voice thick with disbelief. Absolutely, I said, closing my laptop. With a few adjustments to your current roles, of course. I turned to address the board. Verity believed in second chances, in learning from mistakes rather than simply punishing them. I'd like to honor that philosophy. Madeline's perfectly manicured nails drummed silently against the table, her eyes calculating. What exactly did you have in mind? Transparency, I replied. Complete transparency. Over the next hour, I outlined my proposal. Madeline, Adeline, and Griffin would remain at Veracity, but under a new arrangement. They would work directly with our artisans, learning the fundamentals of jewelry creation from the ground up. Their communication with clients and suppliers would be supervised. Their access to financial and design systems would be restricted. This is insulting, Adeline finally erupted. We're industry veterans, not apprentices. You're industry veterans who attempted to steal company property, I corrected. Who systematically sabotaged a colleague until she resigned. Who lied to a dying woman about her protégé. The room grew very still. Your choice is simple, I continued. Accept these terms, or face legal consequences for attempted theft of intellectual property. The board can decide which option better serves Veracity's interests. The vote was unanimous. The trio would stay, under my terms. As the meeting concluded, the board members filed out quickly, avoiding eye contact with their former allies. Madeline lingered, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the rage beneath. You won't get away with this, she hissed. People like you don't win against people like us. I studied her face, the perfect makeup, the practiced expressions, the carefully calculated intensity in her eyes. That's where you're wrong, I said quietly. People like me have already won. You just haven't realized it yet. The months that followed were a masterclass in controlled humiliation. Madeline, Adeline, and Griffin arrived each morning to find themselves assigned basic tasks that even our newest apprentices had mastered. They polished metals until their fingers cramped. They sorted gemstones by size and clarity. They learned to recognize the difference between work that was merely technically proficient and work that carried genuine emotion. They hated every minute of it. This is a waste of my expertise, Griffin complained during his 3rd week of basic metalwork training. Pierre, who had become my most trusted ally, regarded him with cool detachment. You claim expertise in jewelry, yet you cannot properly anneal silver without scorching it. Perhaps the waste is in your claims, not your assignment. They tried everything to escape their situation. Madeline attempted to rally the board for another vote of no confidence, only to discover that the evidence of their attempted theft had thoroughly eroded any remaining support. Adeline reached out to former clients, hoping to lure them away, only to find that those relationships had been permanently damaged during their tenure. Griffin explored legal options, but every attorney he consulted confirmed what Bartholomew had explained. They had signed contracts that allowed for reassignment of duties, and their attempted theft had given me legitimate cause for restricting their access. Throughout it all, I continued designing. The creative spark that had been nearly extinguished during my exile roared back to life. Each piece I created felt more honest, more deeply connected to its intended purpose than anything I'd made before. The international press took notice. Features in prestigious magazines described Veracity's renaissance under my leadership. Orders poured in faster than we could fulfill them. And still, the trio stayed. Pride prevented them from resigning. Greed kept them attached to their substantial salaries. Spite made them determined to outlast me, to find some way to reclaim control. 6 months after the board meeting, I received a call from the International Guild of Fine Jewelry Designers. 3 of my pieces had won their respective categories at the annual exhibition. The guild was hosting a gala to celebrate the winners, with industry leaders and press from around the world in attendance. "Congratulations," Madeline said when she heard the news, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Quite an achievement." I studied her face, noting the new lines of strain around her mouth. "Thank you. I'd like all 3 of you to attend." Their surprise was evident. "You want us there?" Adeline asked suspiciously. "Of course," I replied. "You're still senior partners after all. It would look strange if you weren't present for such an important company event." The night of the gala arrived. The trio appeared in designer formal wear, clearly intending to present themselves as key figures in Veracity's success. I greeted them cordially, introducing them to guild officials and industry journalists as valuable members of our production team. Each time, their smiles grew more strained. As dinner concluded, the guild president approached our table. "Miss Wesley, we'd like to present your awards now. Would you and your team join me on stage?" I nodded, turning to Pierre and 2 other master artisans who had helped refine my winning designs. "Shall we?" Madeline cleared her throat. "Shouldn't we join you as well, as senior partners?" The guild president looked confused. "I was under the impression these were your primary collaborators," he said, gesturing to Pierre and the others. "They absolutely are," I confirmed. "Madeline, Adeline, and Griffin handle more administrative aspects of production." The humiliation was subtle but complete. They remained at the table, watching as I accepted the awards alongside the artisans who had truly contributed to the design's success. Later that evening, as guests mingled during the reception, I overheard a conversation between Griffin and the creative director of a rival jewelry house. "Must be challenging," the director was saying, "working under someone you once supervised." Griffin's response was tight. "Temporary arrangement, market conditions, you understand." "Of course," the director nodded, clearly not believing him. "Though I must say, Wesley's work is extraordinary. That pendant with the interlocking elements, revolutionary approach to movement and light." As I moved through the crowd, similar conversations echoed around me. The trio's reputation was transforming before my eyes, from respected industry veterans to ambiguous background figures in Veracity's resurgence. The following Monday, they requested a meeting. "This isn't working," Madeline stated flatly, no longer bothering with her perfect smile. "The arrangement is unsustainable." "I'm listening," I said. "We want out," Griffin said bluntly. "Clean break. No non-compete clauses." I considered them carefully. "You understand that without non-compete agreements, you forfeit any severance beyond your final month's salary." "We understand," Adeline replied tersely. "Then I accept your resignations, effective immediately." They left that afternoon, clearing their desks under Pierre's watchful eye. No goodbyes, no well wishes, just the quiet closing of the glass doors behind them. 1 week later, industry news reported their new venture, Triad Luxury Jewelry, backed by significant investor funding. Their launch collection was scheduled to debut in 3 months at an exclusive preview event. "Aren't you concerned?" Bartholomew asked during our monthly legal review. "They have connections, resources. They could become serious competitors." I smiled. "I'm counting on it." The day of Triad's launch arrived. Their preview event was held at an upscale hotel ballroom, with carefully curated guest lists and strict security. Through a colleague who had been invited, I received photographs of their collection. The designs were technically impressive, complex, elaborate, visually striking. They showcased expensive materials and intricate techniques. On paper, they should have been spectacular, but something was missing. 2 days later, the first reviews appeared. Critics praised the technical execution but noted a strange disconnect. The pieces didn't move naturally with the body. They photographed beautifully but felt awkward when worn. They impressed at first glance but didn't invite deeper connection. They never understood, Pierre observed as we reviewed the coverage. Jewelry isn't just about what you see. It's about what you feel when you wear it. Over the following months, Triad's trajectory became clear. Their initial splash attracted attention and investment, but client retention proved elusive. People bought their pieces as status symbols, but didn't develop the emotional connection that turned first-time buyers into loyal clients. Meanwhile, Veracity continued to thrive. We expanded thoughtfully, adding new artisans trained in our philosophy of honoring the wearer. We opened a second location focused on teaching jewelry design to young artists from underprivileged backgrounds. We launched a collection specifically designed for clients with physical disabilities, creating pieces that worked with their bodies rather than despite them. 1 year after the trio's departure, I received an invitation to speak at the National Design Conference. My topic, Authenticity as Competitive Advantage. As I stood at the podium, looking out over hundreds of industry professionals, I spotted them in the audience, Madeline, Adeline, and Griffin, seated together near the back. Their company was struggling, industry gossip suggested. Investors were growing impatient. Expenses outpaced revenues. True design isn't about decoration, I began. It's about understanding, about empathy, about creating something that becomes part of someone's identity rather than merely an accessory to it. I spoke for 45 minutes about Veracity's philosophy, about Verity's legacy, about the difference between jewelry that impresses and jewelry that connects. Throughout, the trio watched with expressions that shifted between disdain and reluctant recognition. As the audience applauded at my conclusion, I made eye contact with Madeline. For just a moment, I saw something unexpected in her gaze, not hatred or anger, but a flicker of genuine regret. That night, back in my hotel room, I finally opened the envelope I'd been carrying for months. Inside was Verity's last letter to me, delivered by Bartholomew after her will had been executed. Rhiannon, it began, if you're reading this, then you've reclaimed what was always yours, what I never should have allowed to be taken. Her handwriting was shaky but determined. I knew what they were doing to you, not at first. The treatments clouded my mind, and they were careful around me. But Pierre saw. He told me everything. By then, you were gone, and I was too weak to fix it directly. My throat tightened as I continued reading. So, I made a different plan. I left you Veracity not as compensation for what you suffered, but because it was always meant to be yours. You understand what I built it for. Not profit or prestige, but connection. The ability to translate human experience into something tangible. Tears blurred my vision. Don't waste your life on revenge, dear one. It's too precious for that. Instead, build something they could never understand. A legacy of work that matters, that touches lives, that remains when we are gone. They will destroy themselves without your help. People who create nothing of true value always do. I folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope. In that moment, I finally understood. My revenge wasn't in humiliating them at board meetings or relegating them to basic tasks or even watching their new venture struggle. It wasn't in anything I had done to them at all. My revenge was in surviving them, in thriving despite them, in creating work of genuine value while they chased hollow prestige. They had tried to destroy me because they couldn't understand me. They had seen my approach to design as naive, my connection to clients as inefficient, my commitment to quality as impractical. They had tried to replace something authentic with something that merely looked impressive, and they had failed. 3 years after that terrible day when I'd walked out of Veracity with my belongings in a cardboard box, I stood in our expanded workshop, watching 20 artisans transform raw materials into pieces that would become part of their wearers' life stories. Our waiting list stretched 6 months. Our client retention rate exceeded 90%. Our pieces weren't just worn, they were treasured, passed down, woven into family narratives. Meanwhile, Triad Luxury Jewelry filed for bankruptcy protection. Their investors pulled out. Their elaborate showroom closed. Their technically impressive but emotionally empty pieces were liquidated at industry auctions. The ultimate revenge wasn't in destroying them. It was in building something they could never replicate, something authentic, connected, and genuinely valuable, something that would outlast all of us. The last I heard, Madeline had taken a teaching position at a design school, perhaps finally understanding that technique without heart is ultimately empty. Adeline had joined a large commercial jewelry manufacturer, applying her knowledge of trends to mass-produced pieces. Griffin had left the industry entirely. And me? I continued creating. Not for revenge or validation or even success, but because it was the language my soul spoke most fluently. Each piece that left our workshop carried a small part of my story, of falling and rising, of breaking and mending, of loss and reclamation. The most powerful revenge, I discovered, wasn't in making others suffer. It was in refusing to let their actions define my story. It was in transforming pain into beauty, humiliation into strength, endings into beginnings. It was in understanding what they never could, that true value lies not in how something looks, but in how it connects. Not in its price, but in its meaning. Not in its ability to impress, but in its capacity to matter. If you've ever been pushed aside, underestimated, or forced out of something you built, I hope this story reminds you that other people's actions don't define your worth. The most powerful response to those who try to diminish you isn't hatred, it's excellence. What revenge stories have inspired you? Share in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of resilience and transformation. Remember, sometimes the best way to prove someone wrong is simply to succeed in ways they never imagined possible.